Maria woke up before sunrise, the familiar sound of her alarm cutting through the quiet of her small apartment. She stretched, rubbed her eyes, and sat on the edge of the bed, glancing at the two photos on her nightstand, her children, smiling and full of life, oblivious to the struggles she carried for them. Being a single mother was not easy, but Maria had learned early on that giving up was never an option. She quietly promised herself and her kids that she would do everything she could to make their lives better, even if it meant working harder than most people ever would. Her apartment was modest, with paint peeling slightly on the walls and a small kitchen that had seen better days, but it was home. She moved quickly, preparing breakfast: 2 eggs, some toast, and milk. Nothing fancy, but enough to fuel her day. She called her children to the table, their sleepy eyes lighting up as they saw their breakfast. She smiled, hiding the fatigue in her bones behind a mask of cheerfulness. "Eat up, we've got a big day ahead," she said, her voice calm but encouraging. Her kids were too young to understand the weight of the world on her shoulders, and she liked it that way. By 6:30, Maria was out the door, her worn sneakers padding against the pavement as she made her way to the bus stop. The city was just waking up, street lights flickering off as the sun began to rise. She carried her cleaning supplies in a large tote, worn from years of use, yet meticulously organized. Every cloth, bottle, and mop had its place. People often overlooked janitors, passing by without a second glance, but Maria knew something they didn't: paying attention to details mattered, even in the smallest things. Maria had been working as a janitor at Technova, one of the city's largest tech companies, for 3 years. She had started shortly after her children were born, needing a stable income and flexible hours. Her days were long and often exhausting, filled with scrubbing floors, emptying trash, and ensuring that the offices she cleaned sparkled. Many people assumed her work was simple or unimportant, but Maria saw it differently. She considered it an opportunity to observe, to notice patterns, and to think, even if her ideas were never formally heard. She learned to move quietly, noticing everything from the smallest stain on a carpet to the way employees interacted in meetings. As she entered Technova, the towering glass building reflected the early morning sunlight. She took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself for the hours ahead. The lobby was empty except for a few security guards and the hum of air conditioning. Maria's workday began in the executive offices. These were the spaces few employees got to enter, reserved for leaders and decision-makers. She moved with care, not only because it was part of her job to keep things clean but also because she felt a strange curiosity about the world inside those rooms. While scrubbing the floor near the conference room, Maria overheard conversations through the slightly open doors. At first, she ignored them, focusing on her work, but then her ears caught fragments of discussion: numbers, project deadlines, and technical terms she didn't fully understand. Most of it seemed confusing, but she liked to listen. Over time, she had developed a habit of piecing things together from the bits she heard. It was her secret pastime, trying to understand the bigger picture of the company while the employees around her assumed she was simply cleaning. Even with her limited understanding, Maria could sense tension in the air. The employees sounded worried, their voices tight and hurried. She guessed that some major problem was brewing, though she had no idea what it was. Still, she listened carefully, polishing desks and straightening chairs while mentally noting details. She often found herself thinking, if only someone would look at this differently, but she kept the thought to herself. After all, she was just the janitor. Her ideas weren't supposed to matter. Maria's day was long and repetitive, yet she found small joys along the way. A compliment from a friendly employee, the laughter of children she passed in the lobby, or the satisfaction of seeing a spotless floor at the end of a task. She took pride in her work, knowing that even if it was unseen by most, it mattered. She believed in doing every task to the best of her ability, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. This belief carried her through moments of exhaustion, moments when her feet ached, and her back throbbed. Lunchtime brought a brief respite. Maria often sat alone in the break room, eating a simple sandwich and drinking water from a reusable bottle. She watched her co-workers, many of whom were tech engineers or managers, discussing complex ideas she only partially understood. She smiled to herself, imagining how differently she might solve a problem if given the chance. Maria didn't complain about her position or the limits of her role. Instead, she dreamed quietly, nurturing a sense of hope that one day, her observations and ideas might matter in a way she never expected. After lunch, Maria returned to her routine. She cleaned bathrooms, vacuumed hallways, and organized cluttered storage rooms. Sometimes, she encountered employees who were rude or dismissive. She ignored them, focusing instead on the task at hand. She had learned that reacting to negativity wasted energy she couldn't afford to lose. Her life was demanding enough, she needed her strength for her children, for her work, and for her dreams. Throughout the day, Maria noticed small details that others overlooked. A sticky note on a desk, a misfiled report, or a piece of code printed and left unattended. While these might have seemed insignificant to most, her mind connected them in ways that hinted at larger patterns. She was patient, quiet, and observant. Many would call her work invisible, but Maria knew that even invisible work held power if approached with care and attention. As the day ended, Maria gathered her supplies and made her way to the bus stop again. The city had changed slightly, cars honking, people rushing home, the glow of lights reflecting off wet pavement from a brief afternoon drizzle. She felt tired but satisfied. Another day was done, another day she had survived and provided for her children. She thought about their bedtime routines, homework, and the stories she would read to them tonight. These were the moments that kept her going, the reminders that her hard work had purpose beyond the office walls. At home, she prepared a simple dinner and helped her children with homework, asking questions and listening to their small triumphs and worries. She tucked them into bed, their eyes heavy with sleep, their faces peaceful. Maria sat for a moment, reflecting on her day. Though her life was challenging, filled with responsibilities and exhaustion, she felt a quiet sense of strength. She had survived not only through physical effort but through resilience, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to her children. Little did Maria know that her quiet intelligence, patience, and attention to detail would soon lead her to a moment that would change everything. A moment when the world would see what she already knew, that talent, insight, and courage are not defined by one's job title or circumstances. Her ordinary life, filled with small tasks and hidden observations, was about to intersect with a challenge so massive it would test not only her mind but the courage to step forward in a world that rarely noticed someone like her. The next morning, Maria arrived at Technova with the same quiet determination she had every day. She walked through the lobby, her mop and cleaning supplies in hand, noting the usual morning bustle of employees who seemed unaware of her presence. But something was different today. The atmosphere in the office felt tense, almost electric. Conversations were hushed, and people hurried past her with anxious expressions. Even the security guards at the front desk looked on edge. As she began her routine in the executive offices, she overheard snippets of conversation that immediately caught her attention. Terms she had never fully understood before were being repeated with urgency. Phrases like project failure, critical error, and $500 million loss. She paused for a moment, pretending to adjust a chair, and listened more carefully. The employees were discussing a problem so massive that it had frozen even the most experienced engineers and managers in fear. Something about the main software platform, she heard, was malfunctioning in a way no one could quickly fix. Maria had no formal technical training, but she was intelligent, observant, and had a knack for understanding patterns. She could sense the gravity of the situation just by watching the tension in the room. Employees were speaking rapidly, their voices tight, their gestures frustrated. The CEO, a man usually calm and composed, paced back and forth, his expression a mixture of worry and disbelief. Maria could hear snippets of his voice through the door. "This could cost us everything," he said. "We need a solution now." The engineers had been working for days, running tests, analyzing data, and trying multiple approaches, but nothing seemed to work. The problem was complex, technical, and expensive, and the clock was ticking. Every hour that passed without a solution added pressure, not just financially, but for the reputation of the company. Maria watched as the tension seeped into the environment. Employees were exhausted, some had dark circles under their eyes, and the air seemed heavy with stress. Maria moved through her cleaning tasks, carefully avoiding disruption, but her mind was racing. She noticed small details others might have missed: a printout left on a desk, a diagram partially hidden under papers, the way one engineer kept returning to a particular section of code with frustration. Though she didn't understand everything, she had learned over the years to notice patterns, and something about these fragments sparked her curiosity. She continued cleaning, but her attention was divided. Every so often, she would glance at the whiteboards filled with diagrams, scribbles, and calculations. She could see that the engineers were focused on multiple angles at once, yet the solution seemed just out of reach. Maria realized that while she was supposed to be invisible in this world, she had a fresh perspective that no one else had considered. She quietly wondered if someone like her, unburdened by years of technical assumptions, could see something simpler that others had missed. Hours passed, and the tension only increased. The CEO held emergency meetings, the engineers ran simulations, and the executives monitored every update with anxious eyes. Maria moved from room to room, cleaning as usual, yet she couldn't stop thinking about the problem. The building felt different now, almost suffocating with the weight of the potential loss. She could feel it in the way employees spoke, in the hurried steps on the marble floors, and in the silent moments when no one seemed to know what to do next. During a short break, Maria sat quietly in the break room, sipping her water. She reflected on the fragments of information she had overheard. Though she lacked the technical vocabulary to fully understand the issue, she could sense the logic behind it, the missing link that might connect all the pieces. She thought about the diagrams she had seen, the numbers on papers, and even the casual comments engineers had made in passing. Something about it clicked in her mind, a realization that felt almost instinctive. She returned to her cleaning, trying to act normal while mentally piecing together the clues she had noticed. She wiped down tables and polished surfaces, but her mind was focused on the problem, considering every small detail. She observed how engineers interacted with each other, noticing frustration, repetition, and hesitation. Maria realized that in their urgency, they might have overlooked a simple connection, something so obvious that only a fresh set of eyes could catch it. By late afternoon, the CEO grew visibly frustrated. He stood at the center of the main office, hands on his hips, speaking to a room full of stressed employees. "We cannot afford to waste another day," he said. "We need answers. If we don't solve this, the consequences will be catastrophic." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Maria felt a chill. She thought about her own family and the children waiting for her at home. The idea that a single mistake could cost millions or even destroy the company was overwhelming. The engineers continued their work, checking and rechecking data, but each attempt ended in failure. Maria moved quietly, emptying trash bins and straightening chairs, all the while thinking about the problem. Suddenly, she noticed a small detail that caught her eye, a misalignment on one of the diagrams, a small inconsistency that the engineers had overlooked in their frantic calculations. To her, it seemed like a minor thing, but she instinctively felt it might hold the key. She paused for a moment, wondering if she should say anything. After all, she was just a janitor. Who would listen to her? But something inside her urged her to try. Maria scribbled a note on a sticky pad, explaining her observation as clearly as she could in simple words. She left it carefully on the desk of one of the engineers, her hands slightly trembling. Then she returned to her cleaning, pretending she had done nothing out of the ordinary. Within minutes, one of the engineers spotted her note. At first, he hesitated, assuming it was probably irrelevant, but something about the simplicity of the observation made him pause. He read it again, considering it carefully. Slowly, a look of realization crossed his face. The detail Maria had noticed resolved a critical piece of the puzzle. Excited, he called over his colleagues, and together they implemented the correction. Within seconds, the system began to stabilize. The problem that had seemed unsolvable was suddenly fixed. Word of the solution reached the CEO almost immediately. He rushed to the room, his expression a mixture of shock and amazement. This actually works," he muttered, looking around at the engineers. Then his eyes fell on Maria, quietly finishing her cleaning in the corner of the room. Recognition and disbelief crossed his face. "She did this?" he asked, almost unable to comprehend it. The room went silent. Everyone turned to see the janitor who had solved a $500 million problem in seconds. The atmosphere in the office shifted completely. Employees who had been exhausted and frustrated moments before were now stunned and amazed. They had witnessed something extraordinary. Someone in a role usually overlooked had made a difference that even the most experienced professionals could not. Maria herself felt a mixture of surprise and humility. She hadn't expected recognition. She hadn't even considered the possibility that anyone would notice her contribution. She had simply acted on what she knew, what she observed, and what her instincts had told her. The CEO, composed but deeply impressed, called a meeting with the entire staff. He stood at the front of the room, addressing everyone with a tone of admiration and respect. "What just happened is remarkable," he said. "It reminds us all that insight, intelligence, and problem-solving can come from anywhere, from anyone. Today, we have learned a lesson that no amount of experience or education can fully teach us. Never underestimate the power of observation and fresh perspective." Maria felt her heart pound as the CEO spoke directly about her. The employees clapped, some still in disbelief, while Maria quietly returned to her duties, her mind racing. She thought about her children, about how ordinary her day had seemed at first, and about how one small observation could change so much. She realized that her life, which often felt routine and invisible, held value and meaning beyond what she had imagined. By the time the day ended, Maria had returned home, exhausted but fulfilled. She cooked a simple dinner for her children, who noticed something different in her demeanor and energy, a spark, a quiet pride. She tucked them into bed, reflecting on the extraordinary day. A janitor, someone considered invisible by the corporate world, had made an impact that no one would forget. Maria understood that intelligence, patience, and courage were not defined by job title or circumstances. And in that realization, she found a deep sense of satisfaction, hope, and possibility for the future. The following day, Maria arrived at Technova as usual, carrying her cleaning supplies and wearing her determined, quiet expression. She moved through the lobby with practiced ease, nodding politely to a few early arriving employees who were too focused on their screens to notice her. She had grown accustomed to being invisible in the workplace, and that invisibility had become a kind of shield. No one expected her to do anything but clean, and she liked it that way. It gave her the freedom to observe, think, and notice what others missed. But today, the atmosphere was charged with even more tension than before. The engineers and executives were still buzzing about the $500 million problem, trying to prevent any further delays in a major product launch. It was clear that the company had been losing precious time, and the stakes had never been higher. The CEO had spent the night reviewing data, speaking with clients, and coordinating emergency meetings, and his fatigue was evident in the tightness around his eyes and the way he walked through the hallways. Maria began her routine, entering the executive offices first. She quietly moved from desk to desk, wiping surfaces and dusting shelves, all while paying close attention to the environment. She noticed small changes from the previous day, extra printouts on one desk, sticky notes in unusual positions, and engineers muttering over diagrams they had clearly studied many times. Though the problem seemed technical and complex, Maria had an instinct that something simple, something small was being overlooked. As she moved toward one of the main conference rooms, she paused. A set of diagrams on a whiteboard caught her eye. She had seen them yesterday, but today, in the quiet morning light, she noticed a tiny inconsistency that had escaped everyone else. It was a small misalignment, a detail no one else had paid attention to in their rush and stress. To most people, it would have been invisible, irrelevant even. But Maria's eyes were trained to see details, to connect patterns, and suddenly, a spark of understanding flickered in her mind. Her hands trembled slightly as she thought about what she had noticed. Could such a small detail really be connected to a problem that was costing the company hundreds of millions of dollars? She hesitated for a moment. After all, she was just a janitor. Who would listen to her? What if she was wrong? But then she thought about her children, about the promise she had made to herself to never give up, and she realized she had nothing to lose. Her quiet observation could make a difference if only someone would pay attention. With careful thought, she took a sticky note from her tote and began writing. She described the inconsistency she had noticed, the connection she believed it could have to the malfunctioning system, and a suggestion of how it might be addressed. Her handwriting was neat, her words simple, and her logic clear. She didn't need technical jargon or complex explanations, she needed to convey the observation in a way that anyone could understand and consider. When the note was finished, she hesitated again. For a brief moment, she wondered if she should leave it on the engineer's desk or slip it into the stack of papers. Finally, with a deep breath, she placed it carefully on the desk of one of the lead engineers, making sure it was visible but not intrusive. Then, she returned to her cleaning duties, pretending to mop the floor with the same calm, professional demeanor she always displayed. Minutes later, the engineer noticed the note. At first, he frowned, thinking it might be another distraction in the midst of the ongoing crisis. But something about the clarity and simplicity of Maria's observation made him pause. He reread the note slowly, considering its contents. The more he looked, the more it began to make sense. He called over a colleague, and together they compared Maria's suggestion with the existing diagrams and data. A quiet murmur ran through the office as the engineers realized that Maria's observation solved a critical missing piece of the puzzle. They had been focused on complex solutions, running tests and simulations, but the error had been rooted in a small detail they had all overlooked in their rush and pressure. Maria's fresh perspective, untainted by assumptions or stress, had revealed the connection. The solution was elegant, simple, and incredibly effective. The engineers quickly implemented the correction. The system, which had been unstable and malfunctioning for days, began to stabilize immediately. Screens flashed green, signals returned to normal, and the numbers began to make sense. The problem that had seemed insurmountable just hours before was resolved in moments. The office was silent for a heartbeat, everyone processing what had happened. Then, a wave of astonished realization swept through the room. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. Word of the solution reached the CEO almost instantly. He entered the conference room, his eyes scanning the faces of the engineers as he tried to comprehend the speed and effectiveness of the fix. Then his gaze fell on Maria, quietly finishing her cleaning in the corner. Recognition and disbelief crossed his face simultaneously. "Did she?" he asked, almost unable to form the words. The room went silent. Everyone turned to see the janitor who had solved a $500 million problem in seconds. For a few moments, there was stunned silence. The engineers, who had been exhausted and frustrated just minutes before, were now wide-eyed with amazement. They looked at Maria in a new light, realizing that brilliance could come from the most unexpected places. Even the CEO, who was accustomed to high-level solutions from seasoned professionals, was speechless. Maria had accomplished something no one else had thought possible, simply by observing, thinking, and acting on what she knew. The CEO quickly regained his composure and called an emergency meeting with the entire staff. Employees gathered in the main office, murmuring in disbelief as they tried to understand how such a simple observation could have resolved a problem that had stumped the company's best minds. The CEO stood at the front, his tone serious but filled with admiration. "What just happened is extraordinary," he began. "It is a powerful reminder that intelligence, insight, and problem-solving can come from anywhere. Today, we have learned that every perspective matters, and sometimes, those who are often overlooked can see what the rest of us cannot." Maria stood quietly at the side of the room, unsure what to do. She was not used to attention or praise, and she felt a mixture of humility, surprise, and pride. She had never sought recognition for her work, she had simply done what she thought was right. Yet now, the entire company and even the CEO himself was acknowledging her contribution. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, a sense that her life and efforts had finally been seen and valued. The CEO approached her, smiling warmly. "Maria, your observation just saved the company millions of dollars. Your attention to detail and willingness to act made all the difference," he said. He paused, allowing the words to sink in. "We are grateful for your insight, and we want the world to know that brilliance can come from anyone, anywhere." The employees clapped, some still in disbelief, as Maria quietly accepted the recognition. She returned to her work, resuming her cleaning duties, but everything had changed. The office that had once seemed distant and unapproachable now felt alive with possibility. Colleagues who had barely noticed her presence before now smiled and nodded, acknowledging her quietly with respect and admiration. By the time the workday ended, Maria returned home to her children, who noticed a new spark in her eyes. She told them a simplified version of her day, carefully omitting the corporate jargon but emphasizing the importance of noticing details, thinking carefully, and having the courage to act. Her children listened with wide eyes, proud of their mother and inspired by her courage and intelligence. That night, Maria reflected on the extraordinary events of the day. She realized that her ordinary life, filled with routine tasks and quiet observations, had led to something remarkable. She understood that true talent and intelligence are not defined by titles, education, or status. They are defined by curiosity, attention, and courage. Maria had always known this in her own heart, but now the world had seen it too. And as she prepared for another day, she felt a deep sense of possibility. She knew that life would continue to be challenging, that responsibilities and struggles would not disappear overnight. But she also knew that she had the ability to make a difference, to see solutions where others might not, and to act on her instincts even when the world seemed to ignore her. That knowledge was empowering, and it filled her with hope for the future, for herself, her children, and everyone who might one day learn that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. The next morning, Technova's offices were buzzing with an energy Maria had never experienced before. Employees moved with a strange combination of excitement and disbelief. The problem that had consumed their days and nights, the $500 million crisis, was solved. The room that had once been tense and filled with worry now hummed with curiosity. Everyone wanted to know how it had happened. And most importantly, everyone wanted to see the person behind the solution. Maria arrived quietly, carrying her cleaning supplies as usual. She moved through the lobby, nodding politely to a few colleagues who were still whispering about the events of the previous day. Some of the engineers approached her, their faces full of admiration and gratitude. "Maria, we can't thank you enough," one of them said. "What you noticed, it's incredible." Maria smiled politely, feeling a mix of pride and humility. She had never expected to be praised for simply noticing what others overlooked, and she wasn't used to the attention. As she began her morning routine in the executive offices, she noticed a subtle shift in how people treated her. The usual hurried, indifferent glances were replaced by nods of acknowledgement, small smiles, and even brief conversations. Employees who had never spoken to her beyond a casual greeting were now asking her questions, curious about her thought process. Maria, ever polite and humble, deflected most of the attention, focusing on her cleaning while quietly appreciating the newfound respect. The CEO, who had been deeply impressed by her contribution, decided to make a public acknowledgement. He called an all-staff meeting, something he rarely did except for major announcements. The employees gathered in the main conference room, murmuring among themselves in anticipation. Maria, unsure of why she had been asked to attend, followed quietly, her cleaning supplies in hand. She felt a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. She had never been in the spotlight, and the idea of facing the entire company was intimidating. When the CEO stepped to the front, the room fell silent. His usual calm authority commanded attention, and all eyes turned to him. "Yesterday, something remarkable happened at Technova," he began, his voice steady but filled with genuine admiration. "A problem that threatened the company's success, a problem that could have cost us hundreds of millions, was solved. And the person responsible is someone many of us may have overlooked, our janitor, Maria." A hush fell over the room. People exchanged astonished looks. The idea that a janitor, someone traditionally unseen in the corporate world, had solved a problem of such magnitude was almost unimaginable. Maria, standing quietly at the side, felt a rush of emotions: pride, humility, and disbelief all mixed together. She had never imagined herself in this position, and the recognition was both overwhelming and surreal. The CEO continued, explaining how Maria had noticed a small inconsistency in the diagrams and papers that everyone else had missed. He described how she had taken the initiative to leave a note for the engineers, and how that simple observation had resolved the $500 million problem in mere seconds. "Her insight reminds us that value is not defined by job titles," he said. "Every perspective matters, and sometimes, brilliance comes from the most unexpected places." The room erupted in applause. Employees who had been skeptical, tired, and frustrated now looked at Maria with admiration and respect. Engineers who had worked tirelessly for days on the problem shook their heads in awe, realizing that her fresh perspective had been the key they had all overlooked. Even the most senior executives nodded in acknowledgement, understanding that the success of the company had hinged on her careful observation and courage to act. Maria felt herself blush under the attention. She had spent her life working quietly, doing her best without expecting recognition. Now, the entire company was witnessing something she had always known: intelligence and insight were not determined by position or status. She thought about her children, imagining their faces if they could see her now. The idea that she had made a difference on such a large scale filled her with warmth and pride. After the initial applause, the CEO invited Maria to speak, though she was hesitant. She stepped forward slowly, feeling the weight of the room's gaze. In her soft, clear voice, she thanked everyone and emphasized the importance of paying attention, listening carefully, and trusting one's instincts. "I never expected to be noticed," she said. "I simply observed what others might have missed and acted on it. Sometimes, the smallest details can make the biggest difference." Her words were simple but powerful, and the room remained silent for a moment, absorbing the lesson she had shared. Colleagues approached her throughout the day, eager to hear more about her perspective. Engineers asked questions, wanting to understand how she had noticed the inconsistency. Managers shook her hand, expressing gratitude and admiration. Even employees from other departments, who had never interacted with her before, stopped by to acknowledge her contribution. Maria felt a mix of humility and empowerment. She realized that her voice and insight could now be heard in ways she had never imagined. The CEO, impressed by her courage and intelligence, decided to implement a new initiative at Technova. He announced a program designed to encourage ideas and observations from employees at all levels, emphasizing that every perspective was valuable. Maria has shown us that innovation and problem solving are not limited to titles or roles, he said. We want to create an environment where everyone feels empowered to contribute, no matter their position. The announcement was met with excitement and approval from the staff, many of whom had been inspired by Maria's example. Throughout the day, Maria continued her work quietly, cleaning offices and corridors as usual. But something had changed. The ordinary tasks she performed daily now carried a sense of significance. She understood that her role, often overlooked, had the potential to influence the world around her. She felt more confident in her abilities, more certain that her observations and insights could make a real difference. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her voice mattered, where her ideas could shape the company in meaningful ways. By the evening, Maria returned home to her children, her heart still racing from the events of the day. She prepared a simple dinner, sharing small details of her day without the complexity of corporate jargon. Her children listened with wide eyes, amazed at their mother's courage and ingenuity. For Maria, the most important part of the day was knowing that she had not only helped the company but had also set an example for her children that perseverance, observation, and courage could overcome even the most daunting challenges. As she tucked her children into bed, Maria reflected on the extraordinary recognition she had received. The CEO's words, the applause from her colleagues, and the initiative inspired by her insight were all reminders that life could change in unexpected ways. She realized that her quiet intelligence, attention to detail, and willingness to act had created a ripple effect that would influence the company for years to come. That night, Maria sat quietly in her kitchen, sipping a cup of tea and thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From early mornings and long days of cleaning to observing patterns and noticing small details, every step had prepared her for this extraordinary opportunity. She understood that recognition was not the goal, it was a byproduct of doing her best, paying attention, and having the courage to act when it mattered most. Maria also reflected on the impact her actions had on her colleagues. Engineers who had once thought of her as invisible now saw her as a source of inspiration. Executives who had focused solely on complex technical solutions realized the value of fresh perspectives. And the company as a whole had learned an important lesson: sometimes, the simplest observations from the most unexpected people could solve problems that seemed insurmountable. By the end of the day, Maria felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, that she would still face long hours and responsibilities, and that her journey as a single mother would never be easy. But she also knew that she had proven to herself and to the world that courage, intelligence, and attention to detail could create extraordinary results. And in that knowledge, Maria found a quiet power. She had stepped into the spotlight, not for fame or reward, but because she had noticed, acted, and trusted herself. The CEO's recognition, the applause of her colleagues, and the respect she had earned were simply reflections of what she had always known: that every person, no matter their role or circumstances, has the potential to make a difference in the world. After the extraordinary events at Technova, Maria's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The recognition she received for solving the $500 million problem had made her a figure of admiration within the company. Yet, despite the newfound attention, Maria remained humble and grounded. She still arrived early in the mornings, carried her cleaning supplies, and performed her duties with the same care and dedication as always. But now, every step she took was met with smiles, nods, and occasional words of respect from colleagues who had once overlooked her presence. Word of her contribution had spread beyond the walls of Technova. Employees in other departments, who had never spoken to Maria before, now greeted her warmly. Engineers who had initially been skeptical approached her with questions and discussions about ideas and observations. Even the CEO made a point to check in on her regularly, not only to express gratitude but also to involve her in initiatives that encouraged employees to contribute innovative solutions, regardless of their position. Maria felt both honored and overwhelmed by the attention, but she handled it with quiet grace, refusing to let it change who she was. The company implemented a program inspired by her actions. It encouraged employees at every level to share observations, insights, and suggestions no matter how small they seemed. Maria was asked to participate in training sessions and discussions to share her approach to noticing details and thinking critically. She found herself in a position she had never imagined, teaching and inspiring others. Standing in front of groups of engineers and managers, Maria explained how careful observation, patience, and willingness to act on one's instincts could lead to meaningful solutions. Her words, simple yet profound, resonated with everyone in the room. Despite all the attention, Maria's focus remained on her family. She knew that recognition at work was meaningful, but her true motivation had always been providing a better life for her children. She continued to manage her household with discipline and care, balancing work, responsibilities, and family life. Her children noticed a subtle difference in her demeanor, confidence, pride, and a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from within. They were inspired by her example, learning that intelligence, courage, and observation mattered more than titles, education, or position. As weeks passed, Maria's story began to attract attention outside the company. Local media outlets learned about the janitor who had solved a multi-million-dollar problem, and soon, she was being recognized not only for her work but also as a symbol of perseverance and insight. Interviews, articles, and social media posts praised her intelligence, humility, and courage. Despite the growing attention, Maria remained grounded, refusing to let fame or recognition distract her from her responsibilities. She understood that her actions mattered not for applause but because they had real impact, and that perspective guided her every step. The CEO, deeply impressed by her character, invited her to participate in advisory discussions on upcoming projects. Maria's contributions were valued not because of her title but because of her unique perspective. She began collaborating with teams, offering observations and insights that others often overlooked. Her quiet, thoughtful approach to problem-solving became an example for everyone at Technova. Employees who had once dismissed her presence now sought her input, understanding that intelligence and capability are not defined by status but by attention, curiosity, and action. At home, Maria's life also transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. With the opportunities and recognition she had earned, she was able to provide more for her children: a slightly larger apartment, better educational resources, and experiences that enriched their lives. Yet she remained humble, never forgetting the long hours and sacrifices it had taken to reach this point. She taught her children lessons of resilience, integrity, and determination, emphasizing that success comes not from luck but from consistent effort, careful observation, and the courage to act when it matters most. Maria also used her story to inspire others beyond her immediate environment. She began volunteering in local schools and community programs, sharing her experiences with young students and encouraging them to believe in their own abilities. She spoke about the importance of paying attention to details, thinking critically, and trusting one's instincts. Her message was clear: brilliance is not reserved for the privileged or highly educated, it can be found in anyone who approaches the world with curiosity, courage, and commitment. As months turned into years, Maria's story became a cornerstone of Technova's culture. The initiative she had inspired continued to grow, fostering an environment where employees at all levels were encouraged to share ideas, voice observations, and contribute solutions. Projects that had once faced delays or obstacles now benefited from fresh perspectives, and the company as a whole flourished. Maria's influence extended far beyond a single incident, demonstrating the lasting impact that one individual, acting thoughtfully and courageously, could have on an entire organization. Despite the changes, Maria remained the same person at her core. She still enjoyed quiet moments with her children, simple breakfasts, and evening routines filled with love and laughter. Yet she carried a new confidence within her, a deep understanding that her observations, intelligence, and courage had tangible value. She had learned that being humble and diligent did not preclude recognition, and that one person's insight could transform not only their own life but the lives of countless others. Maria's journey also strengthened her sense of self-worth. For years, she had lived in a world that often overlooked her presence, assuming that a janitor's role could never influence the larger system. Her experience proved otherwise. She realized that talent and capability are not confined by circumstances or titles. They are revealed when one acts with awareness, careful thought, and courage. This revelation reshaped her perspective on life, work, and the potential that exists in every ordinary moment. The recognition Maria received did not make her arrogant or entitled. Instead, it reinforced her humility, gratitude, and commitment to doing her best. She continued to perform her work with the same diligence, now enriched by the knowledge that even small observations and thoughtful actions could have monumental impact. She approached each day with renewed energy, knowing that her life's challenges could be met with intelligence, patience, and courage. Her children, inspired by their mother's journey, began to approach their own challenges with determination and creativity. Maria encouraged them to observe carefully, think critically, and act with confidence. She taught them that intelligence and insight are gifts that can be nurtured through curiosity and effort. Through her example, she instilled in them a belief that no matter how ordinary their circumstances might seem, they too could make extraordinary contributions to the world around them. One evening, after a long day of work and family responsibilities, Maria sat quietly on her small balcony, looking out at the city lights. She reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her here, the early mornings, long hours, and unnoticed observations that had led to a life-changing moment. She thought about the impact she had made, the respect she had earned, and the culture she had helped to inspire at Technova. And she felt a quiet, profound sense of fulfillment. Maria realized that her story was not just about solving a $500 million problem, it was about the power of observation, courage, and perseverance. It was about proving that intelligence, insight, and determination could come from anyone, anywhere. She understood that her journey had the potential to inspire countless others, showing them that they too could make a difference, regardless of their circumstances or role in life. As she prepared for another day, Maria felt hope, excitement, and gratitude. She knew that challenges would continue to arise, that life would demand resilience and effort, but she also knew that she had the ability to meet those challenges head-on. She had proven to herself, her children, and the world that one person's careful observation, courage, and intelligence could transform not only their own life but the lives of many others. And in that understanding, Maria found a lasting sense of empowerment. She had moved from being an overlooked janitor to a respected figure whose insights had created real change. Her story would continue to inspire those around her, reminding everyone that greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places, that intelligence and courage are not limited by titles or status, and that even the smallest observation, if acted upon wisely, can have extraordinary consequences.